Well, hello, hello, hello. It is Thursday, February 20th. I cannot believe that. Where has the time gone this year? Anyway, I am Dr. Tanji. We are here for another session, I guess I would call it, of Let's Talk Power Live. CEO, principal consultant of Liaison Educational Partners, where we work with educational institutions and beyond to help them be who they say they are. And we do that by focusing on curriculum, instruction, and culture. And if you know what I know, you know that culture eats strategy for lunch. And so we dig into culture and we work with our partners to really help them think deeply about their culture and ways to have strong teams, because if you have weak teams, you have a weak bottom line. And we think about bottom lines in education, not necessarily through the lens of money, but we look through the bottom line as a way to understand achievement. We look at the relationships, the quality of how students are feeling as though they belong. And so that's what we help them do. We help them be who they say they are because we're on a mission to ensure every child has access to and receives a leader and a classroom educator that is equipped with the mindset and skill set to ensure that they get the excellent education that they deserve. We're coming to you earlier this week because I'm on the road. I'm headed to the NABI conference, the National Association of Bilingual Education. Their conference is in Atlanta, Georgia. So I'm actually headed out. But I wanted to make sure that I came to you live because what's happening in the world is so important that I didn't want to miss this opportunity. And so as I start with every week, I want to pause and I want to say what I'm thankful for. And I hope that you will stop and pause and consider what you're thankful for. I'm gonna be a little bit transparent. Yesterday, I had one of those days where everything inside my mind was just swirling and swirling and swirling. But I took time to pause and I asked God, hey, I need your help. And I am thankful for the peace that passes all understanding. And so I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for the opportunity to join you every week and to have you join me. Before we go any further, I want to ask you to do two things right now. Number one, I want you to click the like button. And I would love for you to subscribe to this channel. It's a new channel, and we're trying to make sure that we are attending to and inviting as many people in. Actually, I'm going to ask you three things. If it resonates with you, go ahead and share it with somebody else. So let's get started in today's topic. So today's topic is all about the power in history is the power in remembering. We talk a lot about history, and we know that it really is under attack in modern times in a way that we have not seen. But today we're going to delve into some really important aspects of the power that is in remembering. Because when you forget things, you're destined to repeat the bad parts because you don't remember, you don't recognize the impact that it's having on current behaviors. So, as always, here's my question. Do you have your copy of Understanding Your Instructional Power? This is the basis around which these conversations are built, really asking leaders at every level to consider how they understand power and how they wield power in ways that shape the decisions that they make and ultimately can interfere with them being who they say they are. So, QR code is right there. Please go ahead, scan that QR code, get your copy of this book. So, history is a battleground. I'm going to do side by side with you. It is a battleground. If it weren't a battleground, there wouldn't be the kinds of discussions that are underway. And so last week, I shared this very important quote by Carter G. Woodson. Here's what he said. If you can control a person's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. If you determine what a man shall think, you do not have to concern yourself about what he will do. If you make a man feel that he is inferior, you do not have to compel him to accept an inferior status. If you make a man think that he is justly an outcast, you do not have to order him to the back door. He will go without being told. And here's what's most important. And if there is no back door, the very nature of him will demand it. Now, let's be clear. They use male gendered language. Please don't be offended by that. Carter G. Woodson was talking about people, and he wrote this in the time frame. So if the male gendered language does offend you, please go ahead, substitute it. But I'm going to honor him in the words that he said. So if you can control thinking, and at the end of the day, education is never neutral. Education is always about someone's form of indoctrination. The question is whose and how and why. So, the power in history really is about remembering. So, every march toward educational progress has been met with backlash because access to knowledge is access to power. And a lot of that backlash has been violent and virulent. In this modern time, the backlash is legal, which makes it even more dangerous because it locks people in and keeps the access at bay. And so when we think about all that's underway right now, the curricular restrictions, the ways in which people have been weaponized and empowered, right, to challenge things that, you know what, they haven't even read, material that they don't even understand, but they feel like it is their duty to protect other people's children from what they don't understand. That is the height of paternalism. That is the height of patronizing. And it is the height of devaluing the intellect of others. I'm a parent. I have two children. And when I didn't want my children to do what was being offered or expected at school, I took it upon myself to reach out to my children's teachers and let them know that my children weren't doing that exercise. I did not in any way say nobody else's kids should do that. I have an example of a story. Over the summer, one summer, my son's teachers thought it was a good idea to give rising seventh graders Animal Farm to read and digest over the summer. I was an English teacher. I knew that there was no way a bunch of rising seventh graders were going to understand the depth of that material and the exercise that the teacher wanted them to do. Every single chapter, she wanted them to summarize the chapter, write three questions, and then predict the next chapter. That was an exercise in tedium. And so I wrote to my son's teacher and I said, I respect what you're asking these young people to do. However, this is an exercise in tedium. And I gave her chapter and verse as to why I thought so, because of the complexity of the text. And then, so I took him out of that exercise. But then I supplemented it, I replaced it with something I knew was going to be much more impactful. But then I went a step further and I invited some of his colleagues, his classmates into a discussion. I didn't say other kids shouldn't do it. I just made sure that my child wasn't going to do it. But that's this access to power that's happening right now. And so I want to show you something. Power exists on a continuum of consent. And I want you to see this. Right now, this looks linear, but it is not linear. The conditions that are created will set the stage for what stage a person may be on and whether they move linearly or whether they regress towards a different one. So at first, it is acquiescence. We give our power, we consent to someone else's power. When we acquiesce, we give it over because it is a preemptive form of giving our power away because we are afraid of the consequences. We are being threatened, we are being bullied, we are being sanctions are being exacted. Does that sound familiar? Feels like what we're dealing with right now. So people are acquiescing. This happens in schools, in districts all day, every day, that young people are being forced to acquiesce because the power to consent is tied to the fear that if they do not consent, something bad is going to happen. And then we move into compliance. That is behavior that follows the rules and regulations or the expectations to mitigate the punishment. So they're going to go on, they're going to go along. We used to say, go along with the get along, or get along to go along. That's what we used to say. This is different than acquiescence because acquiescence is preemptive. Somebody is barking, barking, barking. If you don't do this, this is going to happen. If you don't do this, I'm going to take your money away. If you don't do this, I'm going to put you in timeout. I'm going to give you extra homework. That's what the acquiescence is about. And compliance means I'm just going to go along with it. I'm going to do what you ask me to do. Teachers in classrooms do compliance all the time with rules that they don't agree with. And so we just do what you ask us to do. I was guilty. I will raise my hand and say I was guilty. But acquiescence is much more dangerous and nefarious. And then we get into indifference, right? Behavior based on a lack of care. We get to a point where we just don't care anymore. And then we get into conformity. We get into in line based upon familiarity or customs or even traditions. And so then we get into the part where I would say this is the goal. You want people to be committed to being in partnership with you about the consent that they give over based upon informed judgment, based upon trust of the relationship and information. This is what this continuum is about. And so we've got to understand how this operates inside the buildings, inside classrooms, inside districts, and then outside of school altogether. This continuum is where we are living right now in our world. A lot of us are living at the acquiescence side. That's why it's red, right? We are giving away our power because we are living in fear. So we want to talk about what does that look like and why we need to get away from that. And shameless plug, but not so shameless, I'm going to be looking at this power continuum in depth during my Power Shift Experience week 3. So if you have not signed up for the Power Shift Experience, I'm going to give you an opportunity to do so. So let's keep going. So the battle for educational liberty, we have been in this battle for a long time. And this, what you're seeing right here, in no way captures everything, but it captures some pretty significant battles. Should have said 1865. This is 1965. You can tell where my head was. I'll go in and correct that. The Freedmen's Bureau, right, allowed formerly enslaved to have access to public education. That was a battle, right? That was fought. And I told you last week that Robert Smalls had a hand in that in South Carolina. But then we get to 1896 and the Plessy versus Ferguson ruling that said Black people and white people have to be separate as long as the conditions are equal. And we know that separate but equal is inherently unequal, which was found out in 1954 with the Brown v. Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas, which desegregates school. One thing you don't know, or you might not know, I don't want to assume you don't know, because of the Plessy versus Ferguson, and in the South, a lot of Black people were not allowed to go to colleges. They were afforded the opportunity to go to top-notch colleges in the North at the collegiate level, because it was the K-12 spaces that were the battleground. The collegiate spaces were not the battleground. And so you see this advancement in degrees at the college level, because again, education at the K-12 level is the cornerstone. It's like the epicenter of socialization for children. So then we get to, in the 1990s, the IDEA Act, which is the first legislation to really acknowledge the needs of students with disabilities. Now, I did forget, in 1968, we have a legislation for the Bilingual Act. This is the first legislation to acknowledge the needs of English language learners. This is huge. But what we are seeing now is a walking away from this legislation. We are seeing orders coming down to strip our students of access to these much needed legislative protections so that they get the excellent education they deserve. So, what happened? How did people begin to exercise their educational agency? Let's be clear, there's always been a fight. We talk about, I don't know if you've ever seen these t shirts that say, I am not my ancestors. That is a nod to this false understanding that the enslaved did not fight. The enslaved fought from the moment they got on those ships to the moment they were freed at every level in so many ways. So I am proud to say I am my ancestors. Shameless plug, off my soapbox, back to the topic here. Exercising educational agency. Here's what we've got. We have indigenous students resisting boarding schools. If we understand what boarding schools are, there was this notion that you should take the Indian out of the man, right? To strip away, violently strip away the culture of indigeneity by having students, children, taken from their family and placed in boarding schools. Those young people resisted. They used their language, they used their customs as forms of resistance against being colonized in these virulently violent ways, right? Then we have Black freedom schools beginning in the 1960s. And those freedom schools have become the impetus for lots of the micro schools that are popping up again. You see a resurgence in Black families homeschooling, particularly after COVID, when parents began to see that their children were thriving at home because they didn't have to deal with some of the hostilities in the learning environment. And so that's an act of exercising educational agency. And then we see undocumented students fighting for DACA access. That's huge. It's really, really important to understand how people are, one, learning that education. Well, I don't say they're learning it, they've always known, but people are leaning into the fact that education is under attack in very major, damaging ways. And they're coming together to really fight this notion of students not having access. Well, not students, let's be clear. I want to be clear and name this. This is about making sure that the image, the physical image of the United States remains what it used to be before we decided that we were going to be who we are on paper. And to be who we are on paper means that America looks very different than how it looked when we first began. And people are standing up and people are fighting against this notion that America was great back in the 1800s to the middle 1950s. America was great for a very select few of people during that time period. So when a person says, I want to make America great again, ask them what time frame they were talking about. And when they tell you the time frame, go do some research and figure out what America looked like during the time frame that they're saying we were great in, or in which we were great. So we also have community driven education movements today, right? And let's talk about that. So what's happening? Let me go back. Whoops. So what is really, really happening right now? We see that there are independent schools coming up, even more so, right? And I'm not talking about just charter schools, because charter schools are public schools and that's a different conversation. I'm talking about independent schools. I'm talking about people coming together from all walks of life, creating micro schools, creating opportunities for young people to learn the full scope of history, for them to get involved in criticality, to really delve into the complexity of our civilization, the complexity of our history. History in any civilization is wonderfully complex. And the fact that there is such a concerted effort to hide and to strip away the depth of who we are lets you know that there's something inherently important in it, and that we've got to decide that we really, really do want to be who we say we are on paper. That's one thing that's happened. Parents, students, and educators are challenging these book bans and the curriculum restrictions. We have power to remember what's happening. We did not get here 4 years ago, 8 years ago. We have been on this pathway since the end of Reconstruction, when there was a wholesale tearing down. Our nation at that time was poised at no other time in history. We were poised during Reconstruction to literally be who we say we were, to say we wanted to be. And due to this understanding, this belief system that the United States of America is meant to be a certain place for certain people, and there was inherent threat to the manifest destiny ideology, which makes room for some and inherently excludes others. There was a tearing down of the open access that was both violent and legalistic. And we are seeing this again, and all throughout our history, we see these movements of backlash. And here we are again. So if you are a student of history, you were prepared for what was going to happen as a result of so much movement when George Floyd's murder was broadcast. And if you were some of those people who went through the work of changing your value statements, of openly talking about anti-racism, or openly talking about diversity, equity, including equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it wasn't part of your original value statements, but you did that in reaction to what you saw because you thought it was a good idea to become forward facing, but you did not calculate our present history based upon our historical past. And so here we are now with organizations, with groups, changing names, taking out titles, because we are in the backlash. Your values are never your values until you've got to prove it. So ask yourself, what are you proving by your history? I was thinking the other day about the fact that we really are in this place. My ancestors were fighting for literacy, and for them, it was a literal matter of their very lives. It was life or death. Liberty or give me death. That was real for the enslaved population. And right now, we are talking about the fact that we are about to lose funds. And don't misunderstand me, I get it. Funds matter because we need capital, we need money, because that's the engine at which that's the engine that fuels our system. But if in fact you change value statements, um, because of George Floyd, and now you're changing them again, ask yourself why, and then really, really ask yourself about this life, death, and liberty perspective. So that's what parents are doing. Communities are creating their own educational opportunities. I grew up in a time where my church taught me my history. We had small group circles. I gave a small group circle to my son's friends when they were learning about Animal Farm, right? I have colleagues who are creating micro schools. This is a fight. And you've got to understand what your power in this fight is and how you can make a difference, because you don't have to acquiesce. You don't. You can lean into the committed part, right? And then we have this opportunity where people from every background are getting politically active. They're learning about their laws. They're speaking up. They're coming together. I'm thinking about my colleague, Karen Chenoweth, who has a democracy and education group where she really, really helps people who are running for school boards. She helps them understand principles, their platforms, how to get elected, how to operate. So these are the ways that people are actively resisting. Our children deserve an excellent education. And when I say our children, I truly do mean every single child in this country. It doesn't matter if you agree with who they say they are. We need to be who we say we are and give them every opportunity to actualize themselves. So we know that education is power. Otherwise, it wouldn't be under such threat. And so think strategically, think critically, think communally, think in terms of what would you want for your own personal child, and then be in community with other people who want our children to have access to an excellent education because they all truly, truly deserve it. And so, again, earlier I said I was going to give you an opportunity to join this invitation to learn. And this is our Power Shift experience. It starts February 25th. Y'all, let me tell you what, this content is so good. It is so good. If you were intrigued by that power continuum, then you want to go ahead and scan that QR code or put in that or type in that link and go to those opportunities to get it. We're still running our President's Day sale at registration and checkout. If you put in TPSE50, you'll get 50% off. Please, I look forward to having you join us. It is going to shift the power in your mind and in your community and in your actions. And then again, get that book. If you want a signed copy of the book, get that QR code and I can get you a signed copy of that book. So excited. Thank you for letting me be here earlier today. Always want to be in conversation. If you have specific questions about the work that we do here at Liaison Educational Partners, or you're saying, I'm seeing some interesting relational dynamics. I'd love to talk with you about that and help me think through it. Please, let's continue talking. There's the QR code. Set up some time to spend some time talking and answering your questions. So again, thank you for your time. Oh, remember, hit the like button, subscribe, and share. Thank y'all so much. Have a great rest of your day.